Welcome to Bedtime, Scaries. Tonight's story has had portions edited for my comfort as your narrator. The full unedited version of the story can be read in the horror short story collection, The October Country. Tonight's story is The Jar by Ray Bradbury. It was one of those things they keep in a jar in the tent of the sideshow on the outskirts of a little drowsy town. One of those pale things drifting in alcohol plasma, forever dreaming and circling, with its peeled, dead eyes staring out at you and never seeing you. It went with the noiselessness of late night, and only the crickets chirping, the frogs sobbing off in the moist swamp land. One of those things in a big jar that makes your stomach jump as it does when you see a preserved arm in a laboratory vat. Charlie stared back at it for a long time. A long time, his big, raw hands, hairy on the roofs of him, clenched the rope that kept back the curious people. He had paid his dime, and now he stared. It was getting late. The merry-go-round drowsed down into a lazy mechanical tinkle. Tent peggers back of a canvas smoked and cursed over a poker game. Lights switched out, putting a summer gloom over the carnival. People streamed homeward in cliques and queues. Somewhere, a radio flared up and then cut, leaving Louisiana sky wide and silent with stars. There was nothing in the world for Charlie but that pale thing sealed in its universe of serum. Charlie's loose mouth hung open in a pink wheel, teeth showing. His eyes were puzzled, admiring, wondering. Someone walked in the shadows behind him, small beside Charlie's gaunt tallness. "Oh," said the shadow, coming into the light bulb glare. "You still here, bud?" "Yeah," said Charlie, like a man in his sleep. The carney boss appreciated Charlie's curiosity. He nodded at his old acquaintance in the jar. "Everybody likes it, in a peculiar way, I mean." Charlie rubbed his long jawbone. "You, ever consider selling it?" The carney boss's eyes dilated, then closed. He snorted. "Nah, it brings customers. They like seeing stuff like that, sure." Charlie made a disappointed, "Oh." "Well," considered the carney boss, "if a guy had money, maybe." "How much money?" "If a guy had, the carney boss estimated, counting fingers, watching Charlie as he tacked it out one finger after another. "If a guy had 3, 4, say maybe 7 or 8. Charlie nodded with each motion expectantly. Seeing this, the carney boss raised his total. "Maybe $10, maybe 15. Charlie scowled, worried. The carney boss retreated. "Say a guy has $12. Charlie grinned. "Why, he could buy that thing in a jar," concluded the carney boss. "Oh, funny thing," said Charlie. "I've got just $12 in my denims. And I've been reckoning how looked up to I'd be back at the Wilder's Hollow if I brung home something like this to set on my shelf over the table. The folks would sure look up to me then, I bet." "Well, now listen here," said the carney boss. The sale was completed with a jar put in the back seat of Charlie's wagon. The horse skittered his hoofs when he saw the jar and whinnied. The carney boss glanced up with an expression of almost relief. "I was tired of seeing the damn thing around anyway. Don't thank me. Lately I've been thinking things about it, funny things. But hell, I'm a big mouth so-and-so. So long, farmer." Charlie drove off. The naked blue light bulbs withdrew like dying stars. The open, dark country night of Louisiana swept in around the wagon and horse. There was just Charlie, the horse timing his gray hooves, and the crickets. And the jar behind the high seat. It sloshed back and forth, sloshed wet, and the cold gray thing drowsily slumped against the glass, looking out, but seeing nothing. Charlie leaned back to pet the lid. Smelling of strange liquor, his hand returned, changed and cold and trembling, excited. "Yes, sir," he thought to himself. "Yes, sir." Slosh, slosh, slosh. In the hollow, numerous grass-green and blood-red lanterns tossed dusty light over the men huddled, murmuring, spitting, sitting on the general store property. They knew the creak bumble of Charlie's wagon and did not shift their raw, drab-haired skulls as he rocked to a halt. Their cigars were glowworms. Their voices were frog mutterings on summer nights. Charlie leaned down eagerly. "Hi, Clem. Hi, Milt." Low, Charlie, they murmured. The political conflict continued. Charlie cut it down to the seam. "I got something here. I got something you might want to see." Tom Carmody's eyes glinted, green in the lamplight from the general store porch. It seemed to Charlie that Tom Carmody was forever installed under porches in the shadow, or under trees in shadow, or, if in a room, then in the farthest niche, shining his eyes out at you from the dark. You never knew what his face was doing, and his eyes were always funning you. And every time they looked at you, they laughed in a different way. "You ain't got nothing we wants to see, baby doll." Charlie made a fist and looked at it. "Something in a jar," he went on. "Looks kind of like a brain, kind of like a pickled jellyfish, kind of like well, come see yourself." Someone snicked a cigar into a fall of pink ash and ambled over to look. Charlie grandly elevated the jar lid, and in the uncertain lantern light, the man's face changed. "Wait now, what in hell is this?" It was the first thaw of the evening. Others shifted lazily upright, leaned forward. Gravity pulled them into walking. They made no effort except to put one shoe before the other to keep from collapsing upon their unusual faces. They circled the jar and contents, and Charlie, for the first time in his life, seized on some hidden strategy and crashed the glass lid shut. "You want to see more? Drop around my house. It'll be there," he declared generously. Tom Carmody spat from out his porch eyrie. "Ha! Well, let me see that again," cried Gramps Medno. "Is it an octopus?" Charlie flapped the reins and the horse stumbled into action. "Come on round, you're welcome." "What'll your wife say?" "She'll kick the tar off our heels." But Charlie and the wagon were gone over the hill. The men stood, all of them, chewing their tongues, squinting up the road in the dark. Tom Carmody swore softly from the porch. Charlie climbed the steps of his shack and carried the jar to its throne in the living room, thinking that from now on this lean-to would be a palace, with an emperor, that was the word, emperor, all cold and white and quiet drifting in his private pool, raised, elevated upon the shelf over a ramshackle table. The jar, as he watched, burned off the cold mist that hung over this place on the rim of the swamp. "What you got there?" Teddy's thin soprano turned him from his awe. She stood in the bedroom door glaring out, her thin body clothed in a faded blue gingham, her hair drawn in a drab knot behind red ears. Her eyes were faded like the gingham. "Well?" she repeated. "What is it?" "What's it look like to you, Teddy?" She took a thin step forward, making a slow, indolent pendulum of hips, her eyes intent upon the jar, her lips drawn back to show feline milk teeth. The dead, pale thing hung in its serum. Teddy snapped a dull blue glance at Charlie, and then back at the jar, once more at Charlie, once more at the jar, and then she whirled quickly. It looks just like you, Charlie," she cried. The bedroom door slammed. The reverberation did not disturb the jar's contents, but Charlie stood there, longing after his wife, heart pounding frantically. Much later, when his heart slowed, he talked to the thing in the jar. "I work the bottom land to the butt bone every day, and she grabs the money and runs off home visiting her folks 9 weeks at a stretch. Can't keep hold of her. She and the men from the store, they make fun of me. I can't help it if I don't know what way to hold on to her. Damn, but I try." Philosophically, the contents of the jar gave no advice. "Charlie?" Someone stood in the front yard door. Charlie turned, startled, then broke out in a grin. It was some of the men from the general store. Charlie, we thought, well, we came up to have a look at that stuff you got there in the jar." July passed warm, and it was August. For the first time in years, Charlie was happy as tall corn growing after a drought. It was gratifying of an evening to hear boots shushing through the tall grass, the sound of men spitting into the ditch prior to setting foot on the porch, the sound of heavy boots creaking the boards, and the groan of the house as yet another shoulder leaned against its frame door and another voice said, as a hairy wrist wiped a mouth clean, "Can I come in?" With elaborate casualness, Charlie'd invite the arrivals in. There'd be chairs, soap boxes for all, or at least carpets to squat on. And by the time crickets were itching their legs into a summertime humming, and frogs were throat-swollen like ladies with goiters shouting into the great night, the room would be full to bursting with people from all the bottomlands. At first, nobody would say anything. The first half hour of such an evening, while people came in and got settled, was spent in carefully rolling cigarettes, putting tobacco neatly into the rut of round paper, loading it, tamping it, as they loaded and tamped and rolled their thoughts and fears and amazement for the evening. It gave them time to think. You could see their brains working behind their eyes as they figured the cigarettes into smoking order. It was a kind of rude church gathering. They sat, squatted, leaned on plaster walls, and one by one, with reverent awe, they stared at the jar upon its shelf. They wouldn't stare sudden-like. No, they kind of did it slow, casual, as if they were glancing around the room, letting their eyes fumble over just any old object that happened into their consciousness. And, just by accident, of course, the focus of their wandering eyes would occur always at the same place. After a while, all eyes in the room would be fastened to it, like pins stuck in some incredible pincushion, and the only sound would be someone sucking a corn cob, or the children's barefooted scurry on the porch planks outside. Maybe some woman's voice would come, "You kids get away now, get!" And with a giggle like soft, quick water, the bare feet would rush off to scare the bullfrogs. Charlie would be up front, naturally, on his rocking chair, a plaid pillow under his lean rump, rocking slow, enjoying the fame and looked-up-to-ness that came with keeping the jar. Betty, she'd be seen way back of the room with the women folk in a bunch, all gray and quiet, abiding their men. Betty looked like she was ripe for jealous screaming, but she said nothing, just watched the men tromp into her living room and sit at the feet of Charlie, glaring at this here holy grail-like thing. Her lips were set cold and hard, and she spoke not a civil word to anybody. After a period of proper silence, someone, maybe old Gramps Medno from Crick Road, would clear the phlegm from a deep cave somewhere inside himself, lean forward, blinking, wet his lips, maybe, and there'd be a curious tremble in his calloused fingers. This would cue everyone to get ready for the talking to come. Ears were primed. People settled like sows in the warm mud after a rain. Gramps looked a long while, measured his lips with a lizard tongue, and then settled back and said, like always, in a high, thin, old man's tenor, "Wonder what it is. Wonder if it's a he or a she or just a plain old it. Sometimes I wake up nights, twist on my corn matting, and think of that jar setting here in the long dark, thinking about it hanging in liquid, peaceful and pale like an animal oyster. Sometimes I wake Mom, we both think on it." While talking, Gramps moved his fingers in a quavering pantomime. Everybody watched his thick thumb weave and the other heavily nailed fingers undulate. "We both lay there thinking, and we shivers. Maybe a hot night, trees sweating, mosquitoes too hot to fly, but we shivers just the same, turning over, trying to sleep." Gramps lapsed back into silence, as if his speech was enough for him. Let some other voices talk the wonder, awe, and strangeness. And so the talking would begin. Juke Marmor from Willow Sump said he thought it looked an awful lot like that kitten his mom made him drown when he was a young one. Jadu, the black man from Heron Swamp, said he was certain it was the center of life, sure enough. And so the stories cycled round and round. What color eyes it's got? Oh, gray. No, green. What color hair? Brown? Black. Red. No, gray. And then Charlie would give his drawling opinion. Some nights he'd say the same thing, some nights not. It didn't matter. When you said the same thing night after night in the deep summer, it always sounded different. The crickets changed it. The frogs changed it. The thing in the jar changed it. Charlie said, "What if an old man went back into the swamp, or maybe a young kid, and wandered around for years and years lost in all that dripping? On the trails and gullies and them old ravines in the nights, skin a-turning pale and making cold and shriveling up. Being away from the sun, he'd keep withering away, up and finally sink into a muckhole and lay in a kind of scum, like a maggot skeeter sleeping in the sump water. Why, for all we can tell, this might be someone we know. Someone we passed words with once on a time. For all we know." A hissing from among the women folk back in the shadow. One woman, standing, eyes shining black, fumbled for words. Her name was Mrs. Tridden, and she murmured, "Lots of little kids run stark naked to the swamp every year. They runs around and never comes back. I almost got lost myself. I lost my little boy Foley that way. You don't suppose..." Breath was snatched through nostrils, constricted, tightening. Mouths turned down at the corners, bent by hard, clinching muscle. Heads turned on celery-stalk necks, and eyes read her horror and hope. It was in Miss Tridden's body, Wire taut, holding to the wall back of her with straight fingers stiff. "My baby," she whispered. She breathed it out. "My baby, Foley! Foley, is that you? Foley, tell me, baby, is that you?" Everybody held their breath, turning to see the jar. The thing in the jar said nothing. It just stared blind white out upon the multitude. And deep in raw-boned bodies a secret fear juice ran like a spring thaw. And their resolute calmness and belief and easy humbleness was gnawed and eaten by that juice, and melted away in a torrent. Someone screamed, "It moved!" "No, it didn't move, it's just your eyes playing tricks." "Honest to God," cried Juke, "I saw it shift low like a dead kitten." "Hush up now, it's been dead a long time. Maybe since before you was born." "He made a sign," screamed Mrs. Tridden. "That's my Foley, my baby you got there. 3-year-old he was. My baby lost and gone in the swamp." The sobbing broke from her. "Now, Miss Tridden, there now, set yourself down, stop shaking. Ain't no more your child of mine, there. One of the women folk held her, and faded out the sobbing into jerking breathing and a fluttering of her lips into butterfly quickness as the breath stroked over them, afraid. When all was quiet again, Granny Carnation, with a withered pink flower in her shoulder-length gray hair, sucked a pipe in her trap mouth, and talked around it, shaking her head to make a hair dance in the light. "All this talking and shoving words. Like as not, we'll never find out, never know what it was. Like as not, if we found out, we wouldn't want to know. It's like magic tricks magicians do at shows. Once you find it's fake, there's no more fun in the innards of a jackapot. We come collecting round here every 10 nights or so, talking social-like with something. Always something to talk about. Stands to reason if we spied out what the damn thing is, there'd be nothing to chew about. So there." "Well, damn it to hell," rumbled a bull voice. "I don't think it's nothing." Tom Carmody. Tom Carmody standing, as always, in shadow, out on the porch, just his eyes staring in. his lips laughing at you dimly, mocking. His laughter got inside Charlie like a hornet's sting. Teddy had put him up to it. Teddy was trying to kill Charlie's new life, she was. "Nothing," repeated Carmody harshly, "in that jar but a bunch of old jellyfish from Sea Cove, a rotten and stinking fit to whelp." "You mightn't be jealous, Cousin Carmody?" asked Charlie, slow. "Ha!" snorted Carmody. "I just come round to watch you dumb fools jaw about nothing. You notice I never set foot inside nor took part. I'm going home right now. Anybody want to come with me?" He got no offer of company. He laughed again, as if this were a bigger joke. How so many people could be so far gone, and Teddy was raking her palms with her fingernails away back in the corner of the room. Charlie saw her mouth twitch, and was cold and could not speak. Carmody, still laughing, rapped off the porch with his high-heeled boots, and the sound of crickets took him away. Granny Carnation gummed her pipe. "Like I was saying before the storm, that thing on shelf, why couldn't it be a sort of all things? Lots of things. All kinds of life, death, I don't know. Mix rain and sun and muck and jelly, all that together. Grass and snakes and children and mist, and all the nights and days in a dead canebrake. Why does it have to be one thing? Maybe it's lots." And the talking ran soft for another hour, and Teddy slipped away into the night on the track of Tom Carmody, and Charlie began to sweat. They were up to something, those two. They were planning something. Charlie sweated warm all the rest of the evening. The meeting broke up, and Charlie bedded down with mixed emotions. The meeting had gone off well, but what about Teddy and Tom? Very late, with certain star coveys shuttled down the sky, marking the time as after midnight, Charlie heard the shushing of the tall grass parted by her penduluming hips. Her heels tacked off across the porch, into the house, into the bedroom. She lay soundlessly in bed, cat eyes staring at him. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them staring. "Charlie?" He waited. Then he said, "I'm awake." And then she waited. "Charlie?" "What?" "Bet you don't know where I've been. Bet you don't know where I've been." It was a faint, derisive sing-song in the night. He waited. She waited again. She couldn't bear waiting long, though, and continued. "I've been to the carnival over in Cape City. Tom Carmody drove me. We talked to the carney boss, Charlie. We did, we sure did." And she sort of giggled to herself, secretly. Charlie was ice cold. He stirred upright on an elbow. She said, "We found out what it is in your jar, Charlie," insinuatingly. Charlie flumped over, hands to ears. "I don't want to hear." "Oh, but you gotta hear, Charlie. It's a good joke. Oh, it's rare, Charlie," she hissed. "Go away," he said. No, sir, Charlie. Why, no, Charlie, honey. Not until I tell." "Git," he said. "Let me tell. We talked to the carney boss, and he liked to die laughing. He said he sold that jar and what was in it to some hick for $12. And it ain't worth more than $2 at most." Laughter boomed in the dark, right out of her mouth. An awful kind of laughter. She finished it, quick. "It's just junk, Charlie. Rubber, paper mache, silk, cotton, boric acid, that's all. Got a metal frame inside, that's all it is, Charlie, that's all," she shrilled. "No, no!" He sat up swiftly, ripping sheets apart with big fingers, roaring. "I don't want to hear! Don't want to hear!" he bellowed over and over. She said, "Wait till everyone hears how fake it is. Won't they laugh? Won't they flap their lungs?" He caught her wrists. "You ain't gonna tell them." "Wouldn't want me known as a liar, would you, Charlie?" He flung her off and away. "Why don't you leave me alone? You're dirty, jealous, mean of everything I do. I took shine off your nose when I brung that jar home. You didn't sleep right till you ruined things." She laughed. "Then I won't tell anybody," she said. He stared at her. "You spoiled my fun. That's all that counted. It don't matter if you tell the rest. I know. And I'll never have no more fun. You and that Tom Carmody, I wish I could stop him laughing. He's been laughing for years at me. Well, you just go tell the rest, the other people now. Might as well have your fun." He strode angrily, grabbed the jar so it sloshed, and would have flung it on the floor, but he stopped trembling and let it down softly on the spindly table. He leaned over it, sobbing. If he lost this, the world was gone. And he was losing Teddy, too. Every month that passed, she danced further away, sneering at him, funning him. For too many years her hips had been the pendulum by which he reckoned the time of his living. But other men, Tom Carmody, for one, were reckoning time from the same source. Teddy stood waiting for him to smash the jar. Instead, he petted and stroked and gradually quieted himself over it. He thought of the long, good evenings in the past month, those rich evenings of friends and talk, moving about the room. That, at least, was good, if nothing else. He turned slowly to Teddy. She was lost forever to him. "Teddy, you didn't go to the carnival." "Yes, I did." "You're lying," he said quietly. "No, I'm not. This jar has to have something in it. Something besides the junk you say. Too many people believe there's something in it, Teddy. You can't change that. The carney boss, if you talked with them, he lied." Charlie took a deep breath and then said, "Come here, Teddy." "What do you want?" she asked sullenly. "Come over here." He took a step toward her. "Come here." "You keep away from me, Charlie." "Just want to show you something, Teddy." His voice was soft, low, and insistent. "Here, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty." It was another night, about a week later. Gramps Medno and Granny Carnation came, followed by young Juke and Mrs. Tradon and Jadu, followed by all the others, young and old, sweet and sour, creaking into chairs, each with his or her thought, hope, fear, and wonder in mind. Each not looking at the shrine, but saying hello softly to Charlie. They waited for the others to gather. From the shine of their eyes, they could see that each saw something different in the jar, something of the life and the pale life after life, and the life and the death in life, each with his story, his cue, his lines, familiar, old, but new. Charlie sat alone. "Hello, Charlie." Someone peered into the empty bedroom. "Your wife gone off again to visit her folks?" "Yeah, she run for Tennessee. Be back in a couple weeks. She's the darndest one for running. You know Teddy." "Great one for jumping round, that woman." Soft voices talking, getting settled, and then, quite suddenly, walking on the dark porch and shining his eyes in at the people, Tom Carmody. Tom Carmody, standing outside the door, knees sagging and trembling, arms hanging and shaking at his side, staring into the room. Tom Carmody, not daring to enter. Tom Carmody with his mouth open, but not smiling. His lips wet and slack, not smiling. His face pale as chalk, as if it had been sick for a long time. Gramps looked up at the jar, cleared his throat, and said, "Why, I never noticed so definite before. It's got blue eyes." "It always had blue eyes," said Granny Carnation. "No," whined Gramps. "No, it didn't. They was brown last time we was here." He blinked upward. "And another thing, it's got brown hair. Didn't have brown hair before." Yes, it did," sighed Mrs. Tridden. "No, it didn't." "Yes, it did." Tom Carmody, shivering in the summer night, staring in at the jar. Charlie, glancing up at it, rolling a cigarette, casually, all peace and calm, very certain of his life and thoughts. Tom Carmody, alone, seeing things about the jar that he never saw before. Everybody seeing what they wanted to see. All thoughts running in at fall of a quick rain. "My baby, my little baby," thought Mrs. Tridden. "A brain," thought Gramps. A fisherman pursed his lips. "Jellyfish." "Kitten, here, kitty, kitty, kitty," the thoughts drowned, clawing in Juke's eyes. "Kitten." "Everything and anything," shrilled Granny's wizened thought. "The night, the swamp, death, the pale things, the wet things from the sea." Silence. And then Gramps whispered, "I wonder if it's a he or a she or just a plain old it." Charlie glanced up, satisfied, tamping his cigarette, shaping it to his mouth. And then he looked at Tom Carmody, who would never smile again, in the door. "I reckon we'll never know. Yeah, I reckon we won't." Charlie shook his head slowly and settled down with his guests, looking. It was just one of those things they keep in a jar, in the tent of a sideshow on the outskirts of a little, drowsy town. One of those pale things, drifting in alcohol plasma, forever dreaming and circling, with its peeled dead eyes staring out at you and never seeing you. Sleep tight.